Tom had reached the age where the world no longer surprised him, but it still tried to provoke him. Younger people, full of noise, full of opinions, full of that sharp confidence that comes from not knowing anything yet, sometimes spoke carelessly around him, unaware of how their words landed. They weren't trying to hurt him. They simply hadn't lived long enough to understand the weight some words carry. Some days, he felt a flicker of frustration. He wanted to remind them that he wasn't fragile, that he had endured more than they could imagine. But every time the fire rose in him, something else rose too, something heavier, older, and wiser. He felt sorry for them. Not in a condescending way, but in the way a man feels sorry for someone walking into a storm without knowing what rain feels like. They hadn't lived long enough to understand how quickly life can take things from you. They hadn't buried dreams. They hadn't watched people they loved disappear. They hadn't woken up one morning and realized the world doesn't owe you anything, not even kindness. Tom had lived through all of that. He had been knocked down so many times that he lost count. There were nights he sat alone in the dark, wondering if he had anything left to give. There were mornings he didn't want to get out of bed because the weight of life felt like a mountain on his chest. He had tasted loss, disappointment, betrayal, and heartbreak. He had walked through seasons where he felt invisible, misunderstood, or simply tired of trying. But he was still here, and that alone made him grateful. He knew now that life was fragile. One moment you have everything. The next moment you're praying just to make it through the day. He had learned that gratitude wasn't something you feel when life is good. It's something you choose when life is hard. So when younger people spoke boldly or without caution, he didn't see disrespect. He saw innocence. He saw people who hadn't yet been humbled by life. He saw people who still believed they were invincible. He whispered in his heart, "If only you knew. If only you understood how fast life can change, you would speak softer. You would walk gentler. You would be grateful." Tom wasn't perfect. He had his moments of frustration. But he had reached a point where anger felt like a waste of the time God had given him. He had survived too much to let small things steal his peace. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky gold, Tom sat on his porch and thought about everything he had endured. He remembered the nights he almost gave up. He remembered the prayers he whispered when he had nothing left. He remembered the quiet strength that carried him through when he didn't even understand how he was still standing. And in that moment, he made a decision. He wasn't living for people anymore. He wasn't living for approval or applause. He wasn't living to prove anything. He was living for God. He wanted to spend the rest of his life doing God's work, being kind when it was hard, being patient when it was easier to explode, being a light in a world that often felt dark. He wanted to show younger people that strength wasn't loud or aggressive. Real strength was surviving storms without losing your heart. Real strength was choosing love over bitterness. Real strength was waking up every day and saying, "Thank you, God, for another chance." Tom didn't need validation. He didn't need the world to understand him. He had peace. He had purpose. And he had a story, one written in scars, tears, prayers, and miracles. A story that proved that even when life tries to break you, God can rebuild you into something stronger. As he watched the last light fade from the sky, Tom smiled to himself. He had been through a lot, but he was still grateful, still alive, still walking, still choosing God. And that, he knew, made him richer than anyone who had ever misunderstood him.